My name is Sašo Džeroski and I come from Ljubljana, Slovenia, from the Stefan Institute. In our work, we focus actually on finding understandable models from data. And we heard earlier this morning why this is a key aspect of artificial intelligence, being able to explain the decisions that are made. But of course, the reality is such that we have to deal with both big and complex data. And getting understandable models from data that are big and complex is quite a challenging issue. So I'm not a salesman, I'm not a businessman. I'm going to talk about technology, very recently developed technology for learning predictive models from big and complex data. And this big and complex data is somewhat in contrast to the classical conception of data, that data comes in a nice single table and that we want to predict a single target variable from a bunch of independent variables. This is the model we know from statistics, but it's been around for a really, really long time. Just as an example though, we encounter this in medical diagnosis problems, for example. Here I have an example from neurodegenerative diseases, including Alzheimer's. And here we want to predict the diagnosis. The patient can have Alzheimer's disease or milder forms of impairment, or it can actually be a healthy subject. The data that we use to make the diagnosis is here a mixture of image-derived biomarkers. So these are volumes of different parts of the brain extracted from MRI images. And then also at the very top, we have a genetic marker that we know is related to neurodegenerative diseases. And then understandable models like decision trees look like this. They refer to the different biomarkers, and then they make predictions about the diagnosis in this case. We have variants of this task. This was a discrete target variable where we have just labels which are from a finite and small set. In reality, quite often we might want to predict real valued numbers like what will be the temperature tomorrow or the price of some stock or things like that. Now, the complexities that we encounter when analyzing data today involve both the size of the data, and we hear a lot about big data. I'm just going to say a few words about what it means to have big data. The data can be big, for example, if we have large numbers of columns or rows in the table that I was showing earlier. So we can have really, really, really wide tables, or we can have really, really long tables with lots and lots of examples. And of course, we need different techniques to handle data of these types. A kind of extreme form of large data is if the data really is constantly coming, and sometimes we can't even afford to store it all, but just need to look at finite portions of the data, do something with them, and then move on to the new data that has arrived meanwhile. And there are lots of challenges in analyzing such data. We need to be very fast. We need, more importantly, to detect changes in the data that sometimes are referred to as concept drift. Now, this is an example of such data stream where the data just keeps on arriving, and the target that we want to predict is a continuous variable, so this is a task of regression on data streams. Now, there are other types of complexity which in the area of big data go under the term of variety. Here I will show you two examples of variety. One is when the data and the input from which we want to make predictions is actually structured. So the data here are chemical compounds, they are represented as graph structures, and they are not really easily squeezable into nice tables with a fixed number of columns. It's possible, but you typically lose some information in this process, and it's not straightforward in any case. So this is one kind of complexity, having structured input, but we can also have a structured output. Sometimes we want to predict more complex things than just a single label. Here we actually have a task of classifying images of microscopic algae, and we classify them into the taxonomy of living organisms. So in fact, we want to predict a set of labels here that follows a path from the root of the taxonomy to the end. And so first we have the families, and then the genera, and then the species, and sometimes even the varieties of the algae. So this is a task of hierarchical classification. The most commonly encountered task of structured prediction is when we have multiple targets. So in the top case here, we have multi-target classification. We have to predict several discrete variables, or we can also have the task of multi-target regression when we want to predict several continuous variables. An example of such a task, again from this medical domain, to assess actually the clinical status of a patient. Typically, the diagnosis is just a really simplified label that you put on top of the clinical status of the patient. To assess the clinical status of patients with Alzheimer's, they typically use a whole range of different scales. They fill questionnaires, they observe the patient moving, so they have, here we have a battery of 23 different numerical scores with which we describe the clinical status of the patient. And then in such a context, we might want to build similar models to the one I showed earlier. For diagnosis, this was a simple decision tree. Now here we have a multi-target regression tree model, which in the leaves where the predictions are made, now gives predictions for all of the 23 clinical scores at the same time. Okay, so this is an example of a multi-target regression task. And it can be viewed at the same time as a predictive model, but it can also be viewed as a clustering, putting together the patients with similar values of the clinical scores. So these are patients that are similar in the deficiencies that they, let's say, exhibit. Okay? And then there, on top of this, on top of predicting structured outputs, we encounter additional types of complexities, which are sometimes even compounded by the fact that we have multi-target prediction. So one of these complexities is what is called semi-supervised learning, where we want to predict a target, but lots of the data that we have doesn't actually have values for this label. Instead of having here yes or no, we have lots of question marks. And the same goes for regression. And of course, this is much more complicated when we want to predict several targets at the same time, because then we have even more labels to put in the table, and putting these labels on is expensive, so we might have question marks here on the target side, which is something that classical methods for regression or classification cannot really deal with. Okay? So some examples don't have labels at all. Some examples have partial labels, like this one here. It has value for just one of the targets, but not for the other two. And there are also other types of complexities, like the most classical assumption in statistics is the IID assumption, that data points are independent from each other and coming from the identical distribution, but this is typically violated in practice, because if we are looking, for example, at people as unit of analysis, then people are connected to other people, they have all sorts of relations, and certainly are not independent of each other. And in such cases, it is very beneficial to take the network structure into account of how these units of analysis are related. Okay, and then again, as I mentioned earlier, these complexity aspects can get combined and appear at the same time in a single task, in a single application domain. Here we have a task of multi-target regression on data streams, so not only we have to predict several things at the same time, but they are also arriving as a data stream very fast, and we have to process that fast. And you can imagine that even further complexities can appear. For example, here in the target values, we might have some question marks, so it might be a task of semi-supervised multi-target regression on data streams. And I'm not just making this up, these actually appear in real cases, in real domains, all of these different complexity aspects and their combinations. So I'm next going to show you, at least very briefly, how we solve these problems, and then I will discuss in a bit more detail how we are using them on different practically relevant problems. So these tree-based models, which are nicely interpretable, are learned by a recursive algorithm, which is very similar to the classical algorithm for learning decision trees. Essentially, we are looking at the data and we try to find a column or an attribute that tells us as much as possible about the target. And we are done when we have only finished with examples which have very homogeneous values of the targets. So let's say if all of the examples have the same value for the target, or these values have very, very small variance. And what is different in this algorithm that we have to the commonly used algorithm for learning decision trees is that actually this homogeneity of the examples in terms of their targets is not assessed according to only one target variable, but actually it can be assessed along a number of dimensions. So in prediction, this is typically assessed along a single target dimension. If you look at clustering, which wants to group examples into groups that are similar to each other, then we are looking at similarity along all of the dimensions. And in this approach of predictive clustering that we are proposing, we are looking at similarity along a number of target dimensions. And just to illustrate this, so this is the classical case of learning decision trees. The clusters have to be homogeneous only along the y-axis. This is the one that we want to predict. And we don't really care if they are homogeneous along the other dimensions. So we can have very stretched out clusters in these dimensions. In classical clustering, we want groups of examples which are really as similar as possible to each other. So we want these hyperspheres in the space of data. And in predictive clustering, we actually get the best of both worlds. We get a tree structure which explains the clusters, and then we get clusters which are homogeneous, not only along the target dimension, but also along the input dimensions. Okay, and of course, if we have tree-based models, then we can improve their performance by learning ensembles of such models. So these are sets of different tree models that we learn from the data. So we take different combinations of the input data, we pass them to a tree learning algorithm, and then get the different trees. And then each of these trees makes its own prediction, and their predictions are combined by voting. And this is a methodology which is very well known. It improves a lot predictive performance. So we can also use this approach when learning trees for predicting multiple targets at the same time. Okay? So, but I would like to return just a little bit back to this notion of understandability and interpretability. So here at the center of all these models in the form of trees or in the form of rules, which we can inspect and understand as long as they are of reasonable size. The unfortunate thing is that typically the individual trees are easier to understand, but are not so accurate in themselves. On the other hand, the ensembles are accurate, but then since there are many different models in the ensembles and they are combined, it's not easy to understand what is going on. And quite an important question is, can we have models that are both accurate and understandable at the same time? And the answer is that yes, we can, at least in some cases, and I will show you on the next couple of slides such cases. So these are accuracy results on two different data sets, and the lines are the performances of different variants of these algorithms for learning predictive clustering trees. The black line is the tree learning approach, which uses only labeled data. And on the x-axis, we have the number of examples, the number of rows that we have taken into account. And as you can see, not surprisingly, the more data we add, the performance improves. This is quite okay. But what we have here in this red line is that besides the labeled data, we are also using unlabeled data. So the data which has question marks on the target side. And we can see that by just using this data, we can actually drastically improve the performance. You see this performance lift for the individual tree, how much we gain in performance if we use the unlabeled data. And the other two lines are for ensembles of trees. And on the right-hand side, we have a similar case. Okay, here we have the single tree, and we have a jump of performance between the single tree and the ensemble, but this jump is actually exactly the same as the jump that we get by going from a single tree to an ensemble and by using unlabeled data. So by using unlabeled data, we can produce one single model, which is understandable, and has the same predictive performance as a whole ensemble of trees. And to illustrate this on an example, here I have actually two such trees. The first tree has been learned from labeled data only, and just 50 labeled examples. And when we test it on unseen cases, it has accuracy of about 80%, okay? And it's small, right? This is only 11 nodes, and this can really be inspected, and you can see what are the main factors influencing the diagnosis here. It's a medical diagnosis problem. On the right-hand side, we have a tree which is smaller, okay? It has 9 nodes, not 11, 2 less. And it has accuracy which is 11 percentage points more than this one, okay? The accuracy has gone from 81 to 92% by using some 2,000 of unlabeled data points. So you can see that actually you can at the same time have a model which is small, interpretable, but also accurate. So this is why we are focusing on this kind of models. Okay. Let me now talk a little bit about applications of this technology in different areas. Even though I'm not a businessman, I'm very, very interested in seeing the results of our work being used in practice. So we use these methods a lot in the context of sustainable agricultural production. The basic conflict here is that on one hand, the population of Earth is growing and needs to be fed. On the other hand, everybody wants a clean environment, low pollution, and these two are quite often contradictory. So we need actually to have quite a knowledge-based approach to choosing appropriate farming practices. And we do this actually by predicting the effects of agricultural actions on different aspects, on, of course, primary productivity, this is the yield, but also on biodiversity and other aspects. So, and of course, since we want to predict all of these different aspects, we need models for multi-target prediction to assess simultaneously how good the action is on the ecological, but also on the economical and aspects. Okay, so here we have actually quite a number of projects. I do not have the time to tell you about them, where we build individual models with data mining from different kinds of data, and on top of this, we use decision support models that capture the preferences of the decision maker. So somebody might be more interested in higher yield, but other people might be interested in more clean environment. Okay? And quite often, actually, we need to predict the effects of agricultural actions also on the communities of living organisms. So we've had a couple of projects for a French company, which is called Arvalis, where we provide models for managing biodiversity in agricultural ecosystems by data mining and decision support. So this means we need models for what kind of organisms are in the soil and how they are affected by the agricultural practices. Then another area where we use this technology is drug design. The compound screening approach takes a library of chemical compounds on the order of hundreds, maybe thousands, and then each of these are checked in the lab for activity, toxicity. And an alternative approach, or complementary approach, I should say, is virtual screening, where from data collected in classical screens, we then learn computer models to predict activity or toxicity that can be applied to many more compounds. And we have used this for tuberculosis and salmonella, which actually are still surprisingly present, and we have produced predictions for some new compounds which our medical partners have actually tested in the wet lab and have been confirmed for activity. And this has drastically increased the efficiency of how many compounds they test and what percentage of this is performing well. So if they did a classical screen, they had something like 7% success, maybe 7% of the compounds were interesting candidates, but out of the predictions that we made and they tested, 5 out of 9 were actually active compounds, so very, very good success rate. And also the models that we produce are understandable in the sense we can have models saying that, okay, if this compound targets a particular protein, then the domain experts can look at what protein this is, what its functions, and so on. And the last application, and we are also doing this for other types of drugs, for example, drugs that help after heart attack, regenerating the heart muscle. And the last application I would like to mention goes to a completely different area of space technology. This is in collaboration with the European Space Agency. Mars Express is a satellite that you actually quite often hear about in the news, at least indirectly. You've all heard about water on Mars, you know, above the surface, below the surface. Lots of these findings come from images related by this Mars Express satellite. Unfortunately, it has been around for almost 15 years, and they really need to be very economical with the energy that it produces and uses. So to save energy for the scientific instruments on board the aircraft, I was shocked to find out that most of the energy on the spacecraft is actually used for heating, because you have equipment there that operates at a room temperature, okay? And out there it's minus 273. So really lots of the energy goes for heating the satellite, and we need to have precise models for predicting the power consumption on the satellite. Since there are 33 lines where they spend this energy, this is typically a multi-target prediction problem. I will skip most of the technical stuff, except to tell you that this is the accuracy of the model that the European Space Agency uses at the moment. This is a model built manually by one of the engineers that's really driving the spacecraft. And it has a root mean squared error of 0.5. So this is error. So the lower the better. And this is the error of the model developed by my colleagues from Ljubljana. And if you show this on a graph, the green line is actually the measured data. The blue line are the predictions by the model from my team. And the red line is the prediction of the model by the European Space Agency. So they are very, very keen to collaborate with us on this one, because they don't have only the Mars Express satellite, they have other satellites where they would want to optimize the use of energy and extend their lifetime. So I've just presented to you some exciting new technology for mining big and complex data that can handle different aspects of complexity, that's efficient, works fast, and can build both accurate and understandable models. Thank you.